Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. What's going on tonight, Brad?
I'm doing all right, man. It's another day in paradise. I was telling you before we jumped on about my wrestle with my kids and how sometimes Thursdays are chaotic. Shuffling them to class and then to make sure I can get them dinner and then getting them in bed, and they all feel like they can kind of go out on a limb and be a little crazy when dad's home and mom's not around. So they're just being little monkeys. What
enjoy it, man. I'm telling you, just enjoy it. It's I got, like I said, I got the twin 13-year-old, so I'm basically just a chauffeur and a supplier of food and money. So actually, mom is down in the Keys right now with her friend. I sent her on a nice little vacation, so I got a week of just me and the girls. Actually, it'll be pretty nice. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Tonight, we are joined by somebody I'm really excited to talk to, Mr. Chris Gachko. For those of you who don't know Chris, he is he's a senior member in Order of Man, and among other things, is responsible for grooming future battle team leaders there, as well as organizing all of the Order of Man events. In his regular life, he spent 20 plus years in the hospitality industry, sales and events, and was a casualty of the pandemic and ended up reinventing himself and moving into the cybersecurity world. Other than that, he lives with his family in New Jersey, his wife and 2 children, right, Chris?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're happy to have you tonight, man. Thanks for joining us.
What's up, guys? This is awesome. I'm excited to be here, guys. Thank you guys for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to a good discussion.
No, it's always good to talk to you. Why don't we start with you, kind of filling in a little bit of the blanks there from that introduction, telling us a little bit more about yourself and just who you are and what you do.
It really all kind of starts with me at home. I am a husband and a father. Like you said, I have 2 amazing kids. One, I don't know if it's unique anymore, but I'm at late stage fatherhood. I have a 1-year-old, and I'm going to be 50 in 2 years. So I got started on the fatherhood train late. Much later than most. I'll be the oldest dad in the carpool lane for a while, probably. So, so yeah, I mean, that's it really starts with my family. I have an amazing son and a baby daughter who's she's the best. She's so much fun. She's a lunatic right now, and my wife is nothing short of amazing. And professionally, how I met both of you gentlemen. I am the event coordinator for Order of Man, International Men's Organization, and which means I handle all the live events for them. We do lots of events at the founder's farm up in Maine. We've done men's events up in southern Utah, even did his original book release out in Nashville. We organize those as well. We've had hundreds of men come through that we've been able to kind of help kind of regain their identity a little bit and help start to kind of make some changes in their lives to become better men. Which is, as you guys know, a really powerful thing to be able to have that opportunity to be able to kind of lead in that way. So I'm able to do that. And then professionally on the other end, that is my part-time job. Full-time, I am now in IT. As you said, I spent almost 2 decades in hospitality and hotels. I spent another large chunk in retail before that. And the hotel I was working at was right on the Hudson River on the New Jersey side, and the pandemic hit, and I handled corporate business travel. And as you can imagine, there weren't once that happened, I didn't just lose a job. My career essentially ended in how I was spending my professional life. So I had to make a choice, and I had some powerful conversations with some guys that I know. And I made the switch, and I went back to school in my mid 40s to completely change my professional life, and ended up going into training for cybersecurity. And then when I left that, I then transitioned into a wonderful IT company out in Brad's neck of the woods. So I get to work remote, and there's a lot of great opportunities there that exist for me, being able to have some flexibility in that way. But it's been quite a journey. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. The first thing that springs to mind when you talk about your journey, you've shared this often, is the pandemic hits everything that you know in terms of your career, everything that you've set to establish goes up in smoke. Life threw you the ultimate curveball. What's so fascinating and what I'd love to have you kind of talk about a little bit is your mental state through that process, going from losing all of this that you've spent so much time building up to having it taken away, to have the wherewithal to get back on your feet and make that decision to go to school. That's a powerful thing.
It's so interesting to kind of think of it in that way, because for so many people, there's a level of fear that exists in that decision. But years and years and years of almost preparing for something like that, and then the opportunity is there. We talk about it in so many different ways, right? The most comfortable way that people talk about it is like, oh, protecting your family. Like I'm gonna go learn how to use a weapon so I can protect my family in case something happens, right? Are we making those decisions in the other areas of our lives? Are we making those decisions financially so that when somebody loses their job immediately, you're financially prepared to make huge decisions that could affect years of your life and make it affected as little as possible? Are you able to make decisions to completely transition in a way like that? And I think that's one of the things that was really, really helpful. My wife and I, we had been doing things in our lives that set us up that when that situation happened, we were able to quickly transition and make a decision. Now, this is not something that everyone could have done in that particular situation. We were financially stable. My wife was able to work through the pandemic. She is a therapist. So she was able to work remotely. We were able to do that. She was pregnant at the time with our daughter. So we had a son. We were transitioning in between houses. We were trying to buy a home. So we were actually living in an apartment at the time. There were so many factors that were going into what was going on. But ultimately, years and years of smart decisions in a variety of different areas of our lives were able to prepare us for that. Financially, we were prepared. Mentally, we were able to have rational discussions to be able to decide that I was ultimately going to be staying home and becoming a student and also like a stay-at-home dad while my wife worked. And we were able, those were awkward conversations, hard conversations, sometimes emasculating conversations, but in the grand scheme of everything, understanding that year and a half window was such a small window of opportunity that this was going to be, we both ultimately kind of sucked it up and we went with that. And that's really where being able to kind of humble yourself into the reality of what's going on and not getting caught into I have to provide for my family. And that means I have to be the one that works the most and does all of this. And that's not ultimately providing. That's not just the only way to provide. I was able to provide by being an amazing father and pulling a lot off my wife's plate so that she could be the primary breadwinner while I went out and did a lot of other things for our family in this time. And those types of decisions going into that is really what allowed us to make this decision and then kind of get through this decision successfully. Because it's not just making the decision. Then we had to make the financial investment for the school. Then I had to go to school for 12 hours a week for 10 months. That pulled me away from my family. Half of my Sundays for 10 months straight. There were no off days. 10 months straight, every Sunday from 9 to 2, I was in school. Every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 to 9:30, I was in school. So there was no negotiation. That changed our entire life. We wanted to do things as a family. I didn't get to do them, or we didn't do them at all. Those types of things. And our relationship helps with that. But also, we made sure that we understood what we were getting into when we did that. That's where the communication comes in. You work years to be able to create that. So being able to set these things in motion immediately, years and years and years, you may never need to make a transition like I did. But all the steps that we took leading into that is what made an extreme situation like that successful for us.
That's a really powerful story. And the two words that I was kind of thinking of the whole time you were talking about it were sacrifice and compromise. And you sacrificed a lot of things, your pride maybe included, because it's tough for us as men sometimes to not be the breadwinners, right? It is tough because we're constantly bombarded with that idea. So there was sacrifice on your end, there was compromise between you and your wife, but those kind of come together. You were able to do those because of your ability to communicate, right? Your ability to build that communication platform with your wife and have those talks. Obviously, you and her had a level of communication leading up to this where you knew how to sit down and have those difficult talks and have those conversations and how to find your way as a couple through it. Can you talk a little bit maybe about that and how you've built that over time?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one trick that I can tell every single person who listens to this podcast: marry a therapist. Simple. No, and it's funny because if you asked my wife like how our communication is, she'd be like, ugh. But like compared to when average people communicate and what they need to do and how they need to do it, it really is an advanced level of communication.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things I struggled with my wife early on was like, I would tell her constantly, like, I'm not one of your patients. And she's like, this is me 24/7. Like, I am not a different person when I'm with my patients than I am now. Like, this is me. And I can really relate to that now as somebody who essentially lost a part of their identity professionally. I felt like at a given time. So I could really kind of embrace that idea. So like a lot of our conversations, she really has the ability to kind of guide them professionally, to be honest. And it's helped me be able to be a little bit more open and understand a little bit more how we can effectively communicate, because there's no way that I can tell you this is the way to effectively communicate,
right?
Because every single person is different. How they receive the information is going to be different. All of that's going to be all of those are variables that change depending on the person that you're dealing with. So for us, immediately when I knew this was happening, which interestingly enough, like we had been having conversations a couple months before most people talked about what was going on with the pandemic, because I worked in hospitality. One of the largest hotels in China is a Marriott hotel, and I was working for a Marriott branded property at the time. So we would get newsletters and things like that. And one of the things, they're going to close this hotel down. And that was like January. It was months before everything really hit the fan. And so I'd been having loose conversations about, just FYI, like, I might be getting laid off. I might be getting furloughed. Like this thing is happening. Don't listen to everything else that's going on. This is going to happen. I don't know what it means, but it's going to happen. So we had been talking loosely about what was going on and what was going to happen. And when it ultimately hit and everything kind of laid out, it was probably only a week after where I had said, you know what, like I really think I need to look in different directions. I need to look at other options and other opportunities and other places where I can do this. And I'm a people person. Like, what are my options? I literally, my first job was with the Gap at 16 years old, and I had been in sales for 30 years at the time. And it was like, well, what do I do? Like, what do I do? Nobody's selling anything right now. It's not like I can find a different industry right this minute. And I talked to other people within the Iron Council, which is Order of Man's kind of elevated brotherhood that stems from Order of Man. And I've talked to several different guys in the Iron Council, which again, this is another part of the humility and the humbling, to be able to have to be in a position to be like, I need help. I need to lean on peers and other men. And honestly, and in some cases they were peers from an age standpoint, but in others they're not. 10, 15 years younger, I'm leaning on for advice and information. And that's humbling. And some people can look at that again as emasculating or embarrassing, but that's the thing that needs to change more than anything else. It's that, you have to lean on the people that you need to lean on to help glean the information that you need, and things like that, like age or location or, political view, anything arbitrary just doesn't really matter. You really have to kind of glean the real information from it. And that's what I did. I humbled myself within the group and talked with several different men about different opportunities. And I got a great piece of advice when it came to cybersecurity. And it wasn't even about go to cybersecurity. Now, this gentleman happens to be highly regarded in the industry, but he told me, he said, you're looking for stability, and you're looking for, somewhere where you're going to be able to grow because you're going to be new. And if you think about it, there's really two industries that can never really get touched by any of this. It's people that create hardware and software, and it's people that protect hardware and software. Everything that's going to get automated, they need the hardware, and all the hardware is going to need the software. And you can't, and even if you're creating things that are going to create things that are going to do the jobs, like, you still need people to do that. So if you're looking into going into an industry that's going to create the machines that's going to take the jobs from people, oh, there you go. Or you're going to go into protect these machines from being hacked and software and upgrade. So that's a real window of opportunity, because it's an area of constant growth, and it's an area that it's untapped potential. And that was what did it for me. That was what made me kind of go into that. And then again, going back to school at 46 years old at the time, I was one of the oldest in my class. Shocker. But again, all of these opportunities it's extremely humbling to have to kind of put yourself in that. But it goes back to being able to prepare yourself personally to understand the arbitrary nature of so many things that make you feel emasculated, feel embarrassed, and things like that. And just understanding a clear, conscious goal that you have, which for me was to creating a stable family, a stable life, something that my children could be proud of, that my wife would be proud of, and that we could build something together long term that would require this short-term sacrifice.
Man, that's awesome. So I heard you mention the word humility several times. I mean, I've heard it several times throughout this conversation to this point. So I've kind of a twofold question, if you will. One, do you think that you would have had the humility to take these steps in your life had the pandemic not hit? And two, why do you think so many men are so resistant to humbling themselves, to admitting that they need help?
Question one. I don't think so. I don't think I would have had the balls to do it. I don't think I would have had the balls to do it unless my hand was forced, and it opened my eyes. Like, I absolutely do now, but I don't think I would have. I would have had too many things going on in my head about what that would have done, putting my family in that situation and all of that. And I would have found so many ways to justify not doing it. I don't think that I'm not even gonna say I don't think I would have. I wouldn't have. I definitely wouldn't have. I'm thankful that this opportunity came up. Like, I look at where I am now professionally and in all other areas. It's like, God, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Like, thank you, pandemic, because so many people failed. So many people lost in the pandemic for so many reasons. We did not. We had a child. I got a new career. We bought a house. Like, we ran the pandemic, man. Like, awesome. Like we took advantage of it. And we talk about, and my wife and I talk about it constantly, and we pat ourselves on the back. We're like, wait till our kids hear this story of what that 2-year window was like for us. I was literally the dad bringing my son to the hospital to wave at his mom goodnight because they wouldn't let us in the hospital because she had COVID and she was pregnant, and they admitted her to the hospital and they wouldn't let us in. And we were doing that for nights. We would drive a half hour to the hospital because he wanted to say goodnight to her. And we were those people. You hear about them on the news with all that. That was us. Like, we were part of that. And that's part of our story. And it was crazy, like thinking about the whole layout of that. But like, I definitely wouldn't have had, I wouldn't have had the guts to pull the trigger without being pushed. And I think that's a really big. I'm really glad you asked that question, because it's not something I actually really considered. I think it's a big lesson from what I went through. The idea of like having the capability to doing it and trusting that, as opposed to kind of being pushed off the ledge and knowing that you're prepared, like jumping as opposed to being pushed. Because I was pushed. And I think more people probably should have the balls to jump, as opposed to it happening. And listen, happening because you're pushed is wonderful, because if you're prepared and then you're pushed, it's great and it works out and fantastic. But having even more control over it, and making those decisions kind of independently, I think that's a really powerful kind of next step in kind of like your personal evolution and your growth, just as a person, to be able to kind of have that level of confidence, knowing that you can kind of make a change and be ready and do all of that. What was your second question?
Why are so many guys scared? Why do so many guys scared of embracing humility and admitting that they need help?
I mean, you could. This is a rabbit hole, man, and I will do my best to skirt around the edge of it. But I really think it's just it's not what society expects. It's not what society wants, and it's not what society expects. And it's hard for the person who's supposed to be kind of standing in a position of authority to kind of, step aside with that authority, even if it's for the long-term gain, even if you know that it's the long-term game. And I think that is where having the support of the people around you that are important to you is huge. Because a lot of people could hear this, right? And then they run into a situation like, well, I heard this podcast and this guy did it, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going into cybersecurity now. And his wife's like, what the fuck are you talking about? What do you mean hold on. I know you just lost your job, but, and it's like, it's not a conversation. It's like, this is what I need to do. I have to do it. But I didn't just have support from my wife. I had support from my family. I had support from her family. I had a ton of support from her family. And, I had a lot of people that maybe not initially saw what was going on and were like, oh, okay. I think some people were kind of like, so you're in school now and your wife's carrying everything and she's pregnant. And, but I think as it kind of evolved and kind of went through and they saw us navigating this, what we were doing, I think they were really impressed, and they saw a team. And they saw us doing it together, because it wasn't just me. There's zero chance I could have done this without my wife unconditionally being behind this. Like, this wasn't just half in, half out. Yeah, go ahead, let's figure this out. Go ahead and go back to school. Yeah, whatever. Like, it was all in. And that, I think, is what really it needs to be. There's that level of total buy-in, not just by me, the person who's doing it, but by the people that it truly affects. Be it, my kids didn't really have much of a say. One wasn't even born yet and was born right at the tail end of it, and the other was too young to really have a say. But, what if I have twin 13-year-olds and I'm making these decisions? You know what? Like, they're part of that decision process. Like, they have to understand. They're old enough to be part of that. Now, are they making the decision for me? Maybe not. There could be valid reasons why one way or the other, but they become part of that process. So there's total buy-in of understanding, like, what I'm doing, what the husband is doing, what daddy's doing, what my son-in-law is doing, what my son is doing. Like, so everybody really understood what was the end game was and what the long-term goal of this was. And it was embraced and it was supported. And when I mean supported, I mean like supported where our kids would go away for a couple days to give my wife the opportunity to do some other things, and me with some free time so we could do, I mean, literally support it. And I think that's another big part of it. The clear communication creates a different level of support. You're not isolating yourself, which is another thing a lot of guys do because they're embarrassed by it. So they isolate themselves. And that embarrassment that society creates because there's this stigma of how you should act, I think is something that really makes that difficult, and why a lot of guys don't reach out. And I think it's why a lot of guys, once they find a group of men, be it a group of friends, be it through church, be it through a mastermind group, professionally, personally, whatever, when they start to see what masculine vulnerability can look like, there's not just a bunch of guys crying like Fight Club. Like it's not like the testicular cancer group in Fight Club where you just stand around and cry for a little bit and hug. Like when they realize what true like masculine vulnerability can look like, which is really just being open and asking for help and being open to growing in that way. I think it opens a lot of doors, and I think that's something that's missing, like people having the opportunity and the access to really see that. So they tend to hide and they keep it within themselves, and it becomes a real difficult challenge for a lot of men to be able to do that.
You've spoken so many times in that example about the power of the pack, which is something we talk about a lot. And you spoke about it in terms of your family, in terms of a group of men, friends, whatever, at different levels. But that power of having a solid group around you and not being that lone wolf is so important when you're going through difficult situations like this, or you're basically going through anything. Having that ability to have a group and preferably different groups who you can lean on for different things, right? You had a group who you just came to and said, this is where I'm at. I need to figure out a game plan going forward. And they helped guide you there. You had a group once we started executing on it who, like you said, were helping with the kids, helping with the wife, helping with you, helping support you. And then you had a group of men who were also just there I'm sure you had your down days where you were just like, this is tough. And you just had somebody there kind of cheerleading you on too. But it's so important to have those men around you. And Brad and I have to speak to it all the time on the podcast. And then we've experienced it so much in our teams and stuff like that. But it's so powerful. And to hear that story on different levels just really made me think about the importance that we need to place on building those groups ahead of something like this happening so that you have that support in place.
Stephen Mansfield talks about the power of having that core group of men. His term is building your band of brothers. That's the name of the book. And a lot of people that are listening to this have probably read it or are familiar with it. And, the example that he gives in the book, which I think is interesting, is that if you have a friend who's doing what he's not supposed to be doing and he's all the way across the country, you as a group figure out how you're going to be on his door the next day to call him out on his BS. It's not just like, hey, dude, why are you doing this? Like on a text, like they're standing at your front door, waiting. They're here. I had a situation, very similar where I have a close friend of mine who's going through something, very personal to him. And there's a group of us, and I was at his home, for a few days at one point, and one of my close friends called me, who's friends with both of us, and he called me. And he was like, do you have somewhere for me to sleep? Because I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. Like, he didn't ask. He didn't do anything. He was like, I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. I just need to know if there's a place where I can put my head when I get there. Like, that's the group, right? That's the people. And the one part I think gets missed in all of that with having the pack is using it. You think you have this really strong group of people, and it's all well and good. But if you don't use it when you need it, then it's not as beneficial. If it's just a bunch of people that you talk to and tell them how great things are, how useful is that group? It's just to kind of build up your ego. If you're not talking to them about some of the struggles you may do and trying to lean on them for some of the things that they may be able to offer you to help you through certain situations, it's difficult. you have to be able to access and use that group in a way that maybe a lot of people don't. It's why so many people aren't successful when they spend a ton of money to be in a mastermind, or they join a group, or they go to a conference. I remember hearing one time that like you pay to go to like a Tony Robbins or something like that. I think the number was 7% of the people actually take action on the items that are there. 7%. So it's like, great. I went to Tony Robbins. Oh, yeah, I went to Tony Robbins. I took pictures for 4 days, and everybody saw it on my Instagram, and there I was, and he was on stage 300 feet away, and look at me. And you know what? But, like, you don't do anything with it. And it's the same thing when we talk about the pack. It's great to have to walk around and tell everybody, look, I'm in this mastermind, or, oh, I have a great band of brothers, and all my brothers, and this and that, and whatever. But if you're not using them for anything, you're just getting on the phone and talking, or you're just telling them about all the great things while your marriage is falling apart, you're almost losing your job, and you're 50 pounds overweight, but you're telling them about the one thing that's working out really well, and you just pat yourself on the back like it's fantastic, but you don't lean on these guys who could be successful in these areas and make you better, then having these people around you is worthless. So you have to be open and vulnerable if you're truly going to have that pack and try to get out of that lone wolf mentality.
This is a concept that Dan and I discuss and practice often. It's not just telling everybody how good it is. We're talking about the one difficulty. It's really diving deep into your soul, going into those deep, dark places that nobody knows about except for you, and letting that stuff out. Mm-hmm. When you can do that with a group of men, that's where growth comes. And, to get personal, I know I told you this the last time I saw you a few months ago. You were the impetus for that in my life. When I joined the Iron Council, I was a mess. I didn't have a group. I thought life was good. My life was not good. You were the person that opened my eyes to realize I needed to do something different. And luckily, I stumbled into Dan and Cameron and all those guys and leaned in and had those hard conversations and started sharing the things deep inside of my soul. And that's how I changed.
I didn't know that until you said that the last time we were together. I had no idea. You were sharing that. I was like, really?
Yeah, call meant a lot to me, man. It put me on track.
But you know what? Like, it's such a fascinating, that is something I think that's really powerful. Literally this interaction, because it's something. Now, I remember the conversation. I had zero clue the level of impact that it actually had, right? I learned somewhat recently, to be honest, that like the level of impact I might personally have on people from little anecdotes like that. There's someone else that's a friend of ours who shared a story that was like, he was talking about, we were at this event and the speaker was talking and he was saying something, and I leaned over to him and I tapped him. I'm like, he's talking about you, man, insinuating that you need to really listen to this. He's like, it changed my life. It totally changed my life. I was like, I don't remember that, dude. I don't even remember, But it's like, we have no idea the level of impact we could have by being that type of person, by being the person who will take a total stranger and just kind of say, hey, yeah, man, let's have a call. I can resonate with what you're talking about. Let's just get on the phone real quick. You have no idea what level of impact you could have on that person. And for years, basically, I had no clue, when it came to our conversation, Brad. And I think it's amazing. And I love, and it makes me smile every time I hear it. But that's where having a level of vulnerability is extremely important, because it's putting myself out there as well. Like, I'm talking to a complete stranger at the time, for all intents and purposes. People think because you're in a mastermind or whatever type of group you want to call it, that because you pay, $100 a month or $250 a month, whatever it is, that all of a sudden you're all like best friends and you should be able to talk about anything. Like, it's not the case. Like, there's 1,500 people in the group that we're in. Like, we don't know everybody. We don't talk to everybody, but the one thing in common we have is we essentially are paying to be part of this, and that everyone at least has some kind of common goal we can connect to. And we still have to be the ones to kind of put ourselves out there a little bit. Maybe we're the ones that have to kind of step into it a little bit more. And hopefully have the opportunity to help others at some point. Maybe not all the time. Doesn't mean we have to go out and be superheroes, but that's another level of vulnerability that we can have, that if we feel like we could resonate with somebody or maybe offer something to somebody, like reach out to them, because probably all of us on this conversation have been that person that wished somebody reached out to us at some point to help us when we needed it. We had our own little hints or things we were hoping somebody would pick up on, and maybe someone will reach down and grab my hand and help pull me out of this, as opposed to being the ones to kind of step into it. And with the work that I've been able to do and we've been able to do, we're a little bit more aware of that type of situation. So maybe it makes us a little bit more open to reach out. And that is the kind of vulnerability you hope that you can help foster with some other people to help kind of make a change that, a 30-minute conversation with Brad, ultimately change, put him on a completely different path. 30 minutes, one 10,000th of my life, whatever that breaks down to, literally changed multiple human beings' lives. Because it wasn't just Brad, it was his whole family.
Yep.
Like it's crazy when you break it down like that. Like that half-hour call, like how many people it truly affected. Or that one comment you make to somebody, or that one person you decided not to give up on, or that one person you decided to open up to a little bit more so that they felt that they had somebody that they could rely on. It's crazy when you really break it down.
Yeah, that idea of vulnerability and just being willing to open yourself up is so important. We talk a lot about in our teams, Brad and I, about leaning in. And it's the ability to just really kind of lean in and let the guys support you. Let your team support you. Because I find it easier for myself to go and be the supporter, but to go in and show my vulnerability and show my problems and show what's not working right in my life is the hardest part. But it allows other guys to support you, so that when you support them, it's kind of this give and take, this symbiotic relationship where you're providing value and they're providing value, and it's not just somebody's always taking and somebody's always giving. There's a lot of power in that, and I have found, and Brad, I'm sure you can say the same thing, that the more you lean in, the more I see other guys lean in, and that's really where we start to grow as men, and we start to grow our relationships and the pack that we were talking about and that kind of thing. And it goes to what you were just talking about before, just that random comment here or there, that random little interaction that may not mean a lot to you, but somebody else who's having a bad day, having a bad moment, has this problem that they can't figure out. By you extending that little bit of olive branch there and pulling them up, it's an incredibly powerful thing. And if we just keep doing it, it pays dividends over time.
Leaning in is difficult as a leader because, well, first and foremost, like it's easy to. This is a phrase that I heard on a call a few weeks ago, and it stuck with me because my biggest challenges are physical. And I mean, I know you guys know that, and I'm struggling, from a condition standpoint. And that's always been my biggest roadblock, my biggest obstacle. And I've been able to do a lot of great work in some other areas, and the veil of deniability is what Ryan Mickler from Order of Man, it's what the phrase that he used that's really resonated with me, and he referred to it as the veil of deniability. And essentially, it was easy for me to hide behind all the successful work I did within Order of Man for the events and all that kind of stuff, and the great work I do within the Iron Council. I help with the leadership development in the program, and I'm on the senior leadership team, and all those types of things. I was able to kind of hide the fact that I really am terrified of making the changes I need to physically in my life, or other areas where I might be struggling, but I hide behind that veil of the success of the things I do well. I'm helping a lot of men. I'm doing all this stuff. And that kind of comes down to what we're talking about with the leadership here. It's like, it's easy to help others. It's very easy to help others when you're a good leader. You could give great advice. You could do all these things, but you could technically hide as well. you could hide behind all of that and just kind of live in the euphoria of being this really helpful dude that everybody thinks is so great, and finding that balance. It's like a dance of like how much to lean in, but still be a leader. And that, I believe, is where leading by example really comes into play. Like being an example physically, mentally, emotionally, etc., allows others to see that you're not all talk, that you're not just full of it. You're not just answering questions from books that you read and using keywords and things that you read online and on Instagram posts and all that. Like you're someone that's actually doing it. So then when you show the vulnerability, other people are more willing to lean in on that as well. Because you're not just full of it. You're not just a guy that's talking. You both live it. And people resonate with that. And I don't think that part of it can be ignored. I totally agree with the leaning in, but I think that for anyone who wants to lean in, they really have to have a solid foundation of who they are personally before the idea of leaning in to get others to do it will be successful. I believe you will fail if you are kind of, for lack of a better term, if you're fraudulent in too many areas of your life and then you're going to come in and try to be vulnerable and do all that, I don't think people are going to take you seriously. You've got to be someone who's really doing the work personally, then doing it to show that you're somebody that they can kind of feel like they can lean back in with you and be someone to kind of help support you because they see that you're doing the work that they're doing as well. So I think that's a really important distinction to have when we talk about that.
That's really good. That actually draws to mind something I read today in James Clear's newsletter that he sends out. He sends this quote. The entire time you were talking, I was just thinking of this quote. It said, "Leadership begins with your behavior. What's more powerful, a manager or a coach or a teacher who tells you the right thing to do, or one who shows you how to live and work by example? People gravitate toward the standard you set, not the standard you request."
James Clear said it way better than I did.
You said it pretty well too.
Shocker that James Clear said it better than I did. But yes, I truly believe that. But taking it to that next level of leaning in, which is something I completely avoided for decades as an adult, of being that person. I always felt that there was no way that I could show a level of vulnerability and do that because that's not what men do. That's not what guys do. Like that's just not what they do, and vulnerability, when you hear that word, it's like, oh, it automatically means like, oh, I cry on my girlfriend's shoulder when I see this emotional commercial over the holidays and that's me being vulnerable. Like that's not what we're talking about here. And semantics drive me nuts. Two things that drive me absolutely nuts as a human being are semantics and outliers. When you have conversations and we're talking about semantics and we're talking about vulnerability and people are like, oh, that means you're going to cry. No, it doesn't mean you're going to cry. It doesn't mean that you have to cry and crying is masculine. Like we're not talking about that. That's not what vulnerability means. It's the same thing with outliers. When you talk about being vulnerable, well, you know what? I don't think David Goggins is vulnerable. Well, okay, David Goggins is kind of an outlier of a human being. Like, let's just be real here. Like, he's an outlier. Like, the kind of things that he does as a human being is an outlier. We can't compare ourselves to outliers. I don't believe. Some people may disagree with me on that. I don't think that you can use outliers as like contrarian examples to things. We have to look at the large product of what it is. And being vulnerable doesn't mean that you're crying and you're wimpy and you're a feminine man or you're effeminate. It means that you have the ability to open up in a way that allows other people in. And that's completely different, to kind of understand what that means. And I think sometimes when the words masculinity, vulnerability, things like that get talked about, people get lost in the semantics of what they think it should be or what the news tells them it is or what a stereotype around it is, as opposed to truly understanding what is actually being talked about when terms like that are used.
That was a really good way to kind of wrap up the idea of vulnerability, and it's not that emotional response, right? It's that ability to be open and honest and speak the truth and not just be, like you said, crying on your girlfriend's shoulder because they saw a pretty flower. So, Chris, I want to be a little cognizant of your time here, so I want to thank you very much. Is there any place on the internet where the guys can find you?
I mean, feel free to follow me on Instagram. It's at Chris Gachko, ChrisGachko, one word. That's probably the best place to do it. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. That's my spot. Anything else that you would need, I can lead you there if you can find it from there. So.
All right, man. Well, we really appreciate you joining us. It's always a good conversation with you. To all the fellas who are listening, thank you. Make sure you check us out on untamingmasculinity.com. You find show notes there. And for this episode and all of our other episodes, leave us a rating review on your podcast player. Apple is the one that we're getting the most playback on. So please check us out there, rating and review. That helps us spread the word. And finally, make sure you come back next week for some more great content. Until then, we'll leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?